May 8, 1945, 23:01 hours, Flensburg, northern Germany. Inside a cramped radio room aboard the passenger ship Patria, Generaloberst Alfred Jodl stood before a microphone, his hand trembling as he held a single sheet of paper. Outside, in the darkness of the Baltic harbor, 2 million German soldiers waited for orders that would never come. The unconditional surrender had been signed 15 hours earlier in Reims, France. But in this room, during the next 30 minutes, the true end of the Third Reich would unfold, not with gunfire, but with 3 radio transmissions that would shatter the last organized military force in Nazi Germany. The clock read 23:01. Jodl had exactly 29 minutes before midnight, when the ceasefire would become official across all fronts. 29 minutes to kill the final hope of Nazi Germany. Before we continue with Jodl's impossible task, we need your help to keep these forgotten final moments alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and the true end of World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Washington to Warsaw, from Tokyo to Toronto. Did your grandfather witness the end of the war? Do you have a connection to May 8, 1945? We want to hear from you. Now back to Flensburg, where Jodl was about to broadcast the words that would end everything. Alfred Jodl was 55 years old. Born in Würzburg, Bavaria in 1890, he'd served in the Imperial German Army during World War I, survived the chaos of the Weimar Republic, and risen to become Chief of Operations for the Wehrmacht. He was a soldier's soldier, methodical, disciplined, educated at the Munich Military Academy. But he was also something else. The last military officer Adolf Hitler trusted to coordinate what remained of German forces. Jodl stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, wore round, wire-rimmed glasses, and had thinning grey hair combed precisely to the side. He looked more like a university professor than a general. His hands, normally steady while reviewing battle maps, now shook as he held the surrender document. He'd signed it himself at 02:41 that morning in a red brick schoolhouse in Reims, signing away everything the Third Reich had fought for. But signing the document wasn't the hard part. The hard part was what he had to do now, because scattered across northern Germany, Denmark, Norway, and the Baltic Sea were the remnants of Army Group Vistula, the Courland Pocket Forces, and Kriegsmarine units, over 2 million men who had no idea the war was over. Radio communication with many units had been severed for days. Some commanders thought they were still fighting a delaying action. Others believed Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz, Hitler's appointed successor, would negotiate a separate peace with the Western Allies to continue fighting the Soviets. They were wrong. And Jodl had less than 30 minutes to tell them. The problem wasn't just distance. The problem wasn't just damaged radio equipment. The problem was that many of these units had standing orders to fight to the last man. Orders signed by Hitler himself. Orders that, technically, had never been countermanded by proper military authority. If Jodl's message didn't reach them, or if they didn't believe it, they would keep fighting past midnight, and the Allies had made clear that any German forces engaging in combat after 23:01 on May 8th would be considered war criminals, not soldiers. Every man who fired a shot after midnight could be executed. Jodl had served with many of these commanders for years. He'd planned operations with them, shared cognac in officers' clubs, attended their weddings. One of them was General Major Friedrich Furch, Chief of Staff for Army Group Courland, the 200 German soldiers still trapped in Latvia, cut off from Germany since October 1944. Furch and Jodl had attended the Berlin War Academy together in 1914. They'd been 24 years old, eager lieutenants convinced they'd help Germany win a quick victory. That was 31 years ago. Now, Furch commanded men starving in Latvian forests, and Jodl had to tell him it was over. The second radio operator in the room was Kapitan Zursi Werner Hartmann, 41 years old, from Hamburg. Hartmann had volunteered for the Kriegsmarine in 1922, when Germany was forbidden from having submarines by the Treaty of Versailles. He'd served on surface vessels his entire career, rising to become Chief Naval Communications Officer for the Baltic Fleet. He had 3 children, Klaus 12, Margarete 9 and little Heinrich just 6 years old. His wife, Elsa, was somewhere in the chaos of refugees fleeing westward from the advancing Red Army. Hartmann had no idea if his family was alive. But he was here, in this radio room, because Dönitz had personally ordered him to assist Jodl in transmitting the ceasefire order. Hartmann's job was to ensure the message reached every Kriegsmarine vessel in the Baltic, North Sea, and Atlantic. There were 156 U-boats still operational, 43 destroyers and torpedo boats, dozens of minesweepers, patrol craft, and auxiliary vessels. Many were low on fuel, running silent to avoid Allied aircraft. Some hadn't received radio contact in 3 weeks. If they didn't get the message, they'd keep hunting Allied convoys past midnight, and the Allies would sink them without warning. The room smelled of salt air, diesel fuel, and sweat. The Patria had been a passenger liner before the war, requisitioned by the Kriegsmarine in 1940 for troop transport. Now it served as the floating headquarters for what remained of the German High Command. The radio room was on the second deck, barely 12 feet by 15 feet, crammed with transmitters, receivers, code machines, and 3 exhausted operators who'd been on duty for 19 straight hours. The temperature was 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Outside, a cold drizzle fell from low clouds. The Baltic Sea was calm, dark as oil. Jodl looked at the clock. 23:03, 27 minutes left. He cleared his throat and lifted the microphone. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, flat, emotionless. The voice of a man who'd sent millions to their final positions and now had to tell them it was all for nothing. Attention all Wehrmacht commands. Attention all Kriegsmarine vessels. This is Generaloberst Jodl, Chief of Operations, Wehrmacht High Command. The following order is issued by authority of Gross Admiral Dönitz, acting head of state of the German Reich. He paused, took a breath. Effective 23:01 Central European Time, 8 May 1945, all German armed forces will cease combat operations against Allied forces. All units will stand down. All weapons will be secured. This order supersedes all previous combat directives. Repeat. All combat operations will cease at 23:01 hours, 8 May 1945. Silence. Then Jodl added something that wasn't in the official text. Kameraden. It's over. Bring your men home. His voice cracked on the last word. Hartmann looked away. The transmission went out on multiple frequencies, naval command channels, army division networks, Luftwaffe coordination bands. The operators sent it in clear text, in Enigma code, in emergency broadcast format. They sent it 3 times in rapid succession. Then they waited. 23:06 hours. The first response came from Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeberg, commanding the remnants of the Kriegsmarine in the North Sea. Von Friedeberg had been in Reims with Jodl, had witnessed the signing. His transmission was brief. Received. Understood. Orders relayed to all North Sea flotillas. Request clarification. Status of personnel evacuation from Courland. Jodl replied immediately. Evacuation operations will continue under Allied supervision. Protect the civilian refugees. That's our last mission. 23:09 hours. Second response. Army Group Northwest, defending the last German positions in Holland and northern Germany. General Johannes Blaskowitz, 61 years old, a career officer who'd opposed SS atrocities in Poland and been sidelined by Hitler for it. His message was longer. Orders received. All units ordered to defensive positions only. Request confirmation. Are we surrendering to Western Allies or Soviets? Jodl's answer was harder. Both. Unconditional surrender to all Allied powers. No separate peace, no negotiations. There was a 10-second pause. Then Blaskowitz sent one word. Verstanden. Understood. 23:12 hours. 18 minutes left. But the third response, the one Jodl was most worried about, hadn't come. Army Group Courland. 200,000 men trapped in Latvia, cut off since October 1944. They'd been holding a defensive perimeter 125 miles long, fighting off Soviet attacks for 7 months. The Stavka, Soviet High Command, had thrown 900,000 troops at them in 6 major offensives. The Germans had held. Hitler had ordered them to hold to the last bullet, because he believed they tied down Soviet forces that could otherwise attack Berlin. Berlin had fallen a week ago, but Courland was still fighting. Jodl leaned toward the microphone. Radio Courland, respond. General Major Furch, respond immediately. Static. Hartmann adjusted frequencies, trying alternate channels. More static. Radio Courland, this is Wehrmacht High Command. You are ordered to cease all combat operations at 23:01 hours. Acknowledge receipt. Nothing. 15 hours, 15 minutes. Jodl felt sweat on his back despite the cold. If Courland didn't get the message, they'd keep fighting. And the Soviets, who'd lost over 230 Zaisirun casualties trying to crush them, would show no mercy after midnight. Marshal Govorov, commanding the Leningrad front, had already issued orders. Any German forces fighting past the ceasefire would be liquidated without quarter. Liquidated. Not captured. Liquidated. Jodl tried again. Army Group Courland, respond on any channel. This is a direct order from the acting head of state. Acknowledge. Still nothing. Hartmann spoke quietly. Herr Generaloberst, their main transmitter was damaged in yesterday's artillery barrage. Intelligence reported it. They might not be receiving long-range broadcasts. Then find another way. Sir, we could relay through one of the evacuation ships. Do it, now. Hartmann grabbed a second microphone, switched to naval frequencies. This is command calling all vessels in Libau Harbor. Any ship with communication capability, respond immediately. 10 seconds, 20. Then, this is Deutschland, hospital ship, Libau Harbor. We read you. Jodl took the microphone. Deutschland, relay the following message to Army Group Courland headquarters by any means necessary. Visual signal, dispatch rider, semaphore if you have to. Message begins. All combat operations cease 23:01 hours 8 May. Unconditional surrender signed. Order from Gross Admiral Dönitz. Message ends. Confirm receipt and relay. Deutschland confirms. Dispatching shore party immediately. 19 hours, 11 minutes. But there was still no confirmation from Furch. Jodl stared at the clock. He thought about the men in Courland, young conscripts, 17 and 18 years old, who'd been drafted in the final months and sent to a pocket that couldn't be reinforced or supplied. He thought about the Latvian civilians trapped with them, over 14 Gunzaran refugees who'd fled Soviet occupation. He thought about the officers he'd served with, men who'd followed orders because that's what soldiers did. And he thought about Oberst Karl Heinrich, his own operations officer, who'd volunteered to stay in Courland to coordinate the evacuation. Heinrich was 38 years old, from Dresden. He had a wife named Anna and twin daughters, 7 years old, who played piano. Jodl had attended their birthday party in 1943, back when Germany still controlled half of Europe. Heinrich had promised to evacuate the civilians first, then the wounded, then as many soldiers as possible before the Soviets closed the trap. That was 6 months ago. They'd evacuated 120 Iwozuren people in that time, loading them onto destroyers, minesweepers, cargo ships, fishing boats, anything that floated, running a gauntlet through Soviet submarines and mines to reach German ports. Heinrich had coordinated every convoy, often personally directing loading operations under artillery fire. Jodl had received Heinrich's last message 2 days ago. Civilian evacuation 87% complete. Estimate 4:00 remaining. Will continue until no more boats available. Now Jodl was ordering him to stop fighting. 23 hours, 7 minutes. The radio crackled, a weak signal, barely audible through the static. Command, this is. Haus Courland. Message received. Jodl grabbed the microphone. Furch, is that you? Negative. This is Oberst Heinrich. General Major Furch killed this morning. Soviet sniper. The room went silent. Furch was dead. The 55-year-old general who'd studied military theory with Jodl at the War Academy, who'd once told him over brandy that a good officer brings his men home, had been shot by a sniper on the last day of the war. Jodl closed his eyes for 3 seconds. Then, Heinrich, this is Jodl. Confirm you received the ceasefire order. Confirmed. Order received. Sir, we still have 200 wounded. Loading on the last ships now. How long until loading complete? Estimate. 40 minutes. You have 7 minutes. Silence. Then Heinrich's voice clearer now. Sir, requesting permission to complete evacuation. Wounded cannot be left. Jodl looked at the clock. 23:25. 5 minutes. Every second past midnight meant his men could be executed as war criminals. But Heinrich had 200 wounded soldiers still on the docks in Libau, and if they were left behind, the Soviets would. He didn't let himself finish the thought. Permission granted, get them on the ships. Once they're loaded, white flags go up immediately. Understood? Understood. Thank you, Herr Generaloberst. Heinrich. Sir, your wife and daughters are safe. They reached Flensburg yesterday. I saw them myself. For 5 seconds, there was no sound but static. Then, thank you, sir. The transmission cut out. 27 hours, 3 minutes. Hartmann was hunched over his equipment, sending ceasefire orders to individual U-boat commanders. 23 submarines had acknowledged. 31 were still silent, either submerged and running silent or unable to receive transmissions. Some might not surface for days. By then, Allied naval forces would be hunting them actively, under orders to sink any vessel that didn't immediately surrender. Jodl watched Hartmann work. The naval officer's hands moved with mechanical precision, switching frequencies, encoding messages, monitoring response channels. But his face was grey with exhaustion. How many boats have confirmed? Jodl asked. 23 confirmed receipt. 12 acknowledge they will surface and signal surrender at midnight. 11 are en route to Allied ports. The others? Hartmann didn't answer immediately. Then, U-boat command estimates 31 vessels are beyond reliable radio contact. We've been broadcasting on emergency frequencies, but if they're deep, keep trying. Sir, after midnight, the Allies... I know what happens after midnight, keep trying. 29 hours, 1 minute. In operations rooms across Europe, Allied commanders watched their clocks. In London, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery stood at a map table waiting. In Paris, General Dwight Eisenhower held a glass of champagne he hadn't sipped. In Moscow, Marshal Georgy Zhukov sat in Stalin's office, telephone in hand. Everyone was waiting for 23:01. In Flensburg, aboard the Patria, Jodl set down his microphone. The transmission was complete. Every command that could be reached had been reached. Everything that could be said had been said. It was 30 seconds. Hartmann stood at attention. The 3 radio operators turned away from their equipment. One of them, a young Gefreiter named Hans Müller, 19 years old, from Stuttgart, had tears running down his face. Jodl removed his cap. 23, 30, 45, 15 seconds. Somewhere in the Baltic, aboard destroyers and minesweepers packed with wounded soldiers and refugees, white flags were being raised. In Courland, Oberst Heinrich watched the last wounded man being carried up a gangplank. In the North Sea, U-boat commanders gave orders to surface. In Holland, General Blaskowitz walked into a farmhouse to officially surrender to Canadian forces. 23, 30, 55, 5 seconds. Jodl thought about the last 6 years, the invasions he'd planned, the armies he'd moved across maps, the reports of casualties that had become just numbers. 10, Ausern lost here, 30,000 there. Eventually you stopped seeing them as men. But now, standing in this cramped radio room, he could see every face, every soldier he'd sent into battle who'd never come home. 23:31:00, May 8th, 1945 became May 9th, and everything stopped. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was thick, heavy, suffocating. It was the silence of 2 million men realizing that everything they'd fought for, every frozen kilometer of Russia, every bombed-out city, every friend who died beside them, had ended in unconditional surrender. But it was also something else. It was the silence of men who would live. The first confirmation came at 23:34 from Heinrich in Courland. All wounded aboard, white flags displayed. Soviet forces holding fire. Request permission to evacuate headquarters staff. Jodl, permission granted, get everyone out. At 23:41, Army Group Northwest reported all units had ceased fire and moved to assembly areas. Not a single shot had been fired past midnight. At 23:47, U-boat U-249, operating off the coast of Scotland, surfaced and transmitted its position to Royal Navy forces. Commander Willy Koitschka, 32 years old, from Kiel, had been preparing to attack a convoy. Instead, he radioed, U-249 surrendering in accordance with 8th May ceasefire. Request instructions. The Royal Navy destroyer HMS Obdurate approached with guns trained but did not fire. A boarding party secured the submarine. Koitschka and his crew of 52 men were taken prisoner. They would all survive the war. By I-015, all major Wehrmacht and Kriegsmarine commands had confirmed compliance with the ceasefire. Total German military personnel under arms, approximately 6 million. Of those, 3 million would surrender to Western Allied forces. 3 million would be captured by Soviet forces. The evacuation from Courland continued for 3 more days under Soviet supervision. Heinrich managed to get the last ships out on May 11th. Total evacuated, 128, the 0 soldiers and 18, the 1 civilians. Heinrich himself left on the final destroyer, the Z-25, which departed Libau Harbor at 06 Zwansu on May 11th under white flag. The Soviets kept their word and allowed the evacuation to proceed. Furch's body was never recovered. He was 55 years old. After the ceasefire, Jodl remained in Flensburg as part of the Flensburg government, the brief administration under Dönitz that functioned for 23 days until Allied forces dissolved it on May 23, 1945. Jodl was arrested and transported to Nuremberg to stand trial as a war criminal. The prosecution charged him with conspiracy to wage aggressive war, crimes against peace, war crimes and crimes against humanity. The evidence was extensive. His signature appeared on countless operational orders, including the Commando Order, directing the execution of captured commandos, and the Commissar Order, mandating the killing of Soviet political officers. Jodl defended himself by arguing he was a soldier following orders. He claimed he had protested some of Hitler's directives, but ultimately had no choice but to obey. He pointed out that he had nothing to do with concentration camps, the Holocaust, or SS actions. His responsibility was purely military operations. The tribunal was unconvinced. On October 4, 1946, Jodl was found guilty on all 4 counts. The judges noted that while he may have opposed certain policies, he had implemented them without protest and had signed orders that directly violated the laws of war. On October 16, 1946, at 01:34 in the morning, Alfred Jodl was hanged in the gymnasium of Nuremberg prison. He was 56 years old. His last words were, "I greet you, my Germany." His body was cremated and his ashes scattered in the Isar River. In 1953, a German denazification court reviewed his case posthumously and concluded he was not guilty of crimes against humanity, but did not overturn the war crimes conviction. It was a minor legal distinction that meant nothing. Jodl was already 7 years dead. Werner Hartmann, the naval communications officer, survived the war. He was held in British custody for 18 months, then released in November 1946. He returned to Hamburg and found his wife and 3 children alive, living in a bombed-out apartment building. He worked as a radio technician for a shipping company for 23 years. He never spoke publicly about his role in the surrender. He died in 1971, aged 67, of a heart attack. His obituary in the Hamburger Abendblatt was 4 sentences long and didn't mention his wartime service. Oberst Karl Heinrich made it back to Germany on May 14, 1945, aboard the destroyer Z-25. He was immediately detained by British forces and spent 2 years in a POW camp in England. He was released in 1947 and reunited with his wife and twin daughters in what would become West Germany. He became a bookkeeper for a textile factory in Bielefeld. He never held military rank again. When his daughters asked about the war, he would only say, "We did what we could to bring the men home." He died in 1982, aged 75, of complications from emphysema. In his personal effects, investigators found a leather journal with 147 names written in pencil, soldiers who died during the Courland evacuation operations. Next to each name was a hometown and, when known, the name of a wife or mother. Heinrich had sent letters to each family after the war, using his own money for postage. No memorial was ever erected to his efforts. No medal was awarded posthumously. The journal now sits in a regional archive in Bielefeld, catalogued as Document 1982-H47, Personal Papers of Karl Heinrich, Civilian, 1907-1982. The final tally of casualties from those last 30 minutes is impossible to calculate precisely. What we know is this: 0 German soldiers were executed for combat actions occurring between 23:01 on May 8th and 00:01 on May 9th, 1945. The evacuation from Courland, which continued until May 11th under the ceasefire agreement, saved approximately 18 Bauernsachen civilians who would have otherwise faced Soviet occupation. Of the 31 U-boats that failed to receive the ceasefire order in time, 4 were sunk by Allied forces in combat between May 9th and 12. Combined crew losses, 187 men. The remaining 27 submarines eventually surfaced and surrendered when they received belated messages or their fuel ran out. All crew members survived as POWs. In 2015, a German military historian named Dr. Matthias Strohn published a paper titled The Last Signal: Command and Control in the Final Hours of Nazi Germany. In it, he argued that Jodel's radio transmissions on May 8, 1945, prevented what could have been a catastrophic continuation of combat that might have killed tens of thousands more soldiers on both sides. Strohn interviewed 3 surviving veterans who'd been in Courland during the surrender. One of them, former Obergefreiter Ernst Bauer, 91 years old, remembered the moment the white flags went up. "We'd been fighting for 7 months. We'd lost friends every day. And then suddenly an officer came running down the trench shouting that it was over. We were surrendering, white flags up. Some of the boys cried. Some just sat down. I remember thinking, I'm going to see my mother again, that's all. Just that one thought." Bauer returned to Germany in 1948 after 3 years in a Soviet POW camp. He became a baker in Frankfurt. He married, had 2 children, 6 grandchildren. He died in 2017, aged 93. At his funeral, his grandson found a medal in his belongings, a Wehrmacht service medal, standard issue. Nothing special, but pinned to the ribbon was a small piece of white cloth, roughly 3 inches by 3 inches, frayed at the edges. It was the white flag from Courland. Today, if you visit Flensburg, there's no marker indicating where the Patria was moored on May 8, 1945. The ship itself was scrapped in 1950. The harbour looks like any other northern German port. Fishing boats, cargo vessels, tourists eating ice cream along the waterfront. In Nuremberg, the gymnasium where Jodl was hanged is now part of a museum. Tour guides mention him briefly, one of the 10 executed after the main trials, and move on. Most visitors take photos and leave within 20 minutes. In Courland, now part of Latvia, there's a small memorial near Liepaja, formerly Libau, listing the names of Soviet soldiers who died in the fighting there. It doesn't mention the German evacuation. The only marker of Heinrich's work is that journal in Bielefeld, 147 names in pencil, gathering dust. But here's what matters. On May 8, 1945, at 23:01, in a cramped radio room aboard a converted passenger liner, a 55-year-old general and a 41-year-old naval officer sent out 3 transmissions that shut down the largest military force in German history. They had 30 minutes to save 2 million men from becoming war criminals. And they did it, not with a dramatic battle, not with a heroic last stand, but with clear orders, precise coordination, and the unglamorous work of ensuring a message reached the people who needed to hear it. The Third Reich ended not with fire but with radio static and white flags, and thousands of men came home because of it. If this story moved you, if it gave you a glimpse of the complex reality of how wars actually end, do us a favor. Hit that like button. It helps YouTube share these forgotten final moments with people who care about real history, not Hollywood myths. Subscribe to this channel because we're committed to finding these stories. The ones that textbooks skip, the ones that don't fit the neat narratives. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Did someone in your family experience the end of World War II? We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Your connection to this history matters. Share it with us. Thanks for keeping these memories alive. Thanks for giving people like Jodl, Heinrich, and the men of Courland a few more minutes of remembrance. See you in the next story.